There is no such thing as a perfect story, but Fullmetal Alchemist comes close. Action, adventure, fantasy, philosophy, drama, romance, comedy, tragedy. Fullmetal Alchemist's got something in it for everyone, and it has a message for every heart. It's not just another anime. It's a journey. Let me tell you about it. Two brothers, Alphonse and Edward Elric, try and bring back their mother through the greatest taboo in alchemy, human transmutation. Unfortunately, their attempt backfires, and Ed loses an arm and a leg, and Alphonse loses his very body, and both of them lose their innocence. Together, they journey to try and bring back what they lost. I found Fullmetal Alchemist through a friend. I was only just getting into anime at the time, and Fullmetal Alchemist was the second series that I watched when I knew what anime was. It so happened to be the first series, and I didn't know at the time that it deviated from the manga, which I wasn't reading at that point either. But something about it was so different from the other series that I'd encountered. So many of the issues dealt in the series, they just touched me, and I could really relate to them. The many issues dealt with in the series are very real, some of which many people encounter in their everyday lives. Fullmetal Alchemist has affected me very profoundly, and even when I rewatch it years later, it still continues to affect me. There are so many characters which I can relate to. Winry, for instance. The fact that you feel like you're being kept out of the loop when your siblings are doing things and they don't tell you, and you just feel like you're on the outside looking in. Alphonse, I can also relate to him as well, especially in the fact that he doesn't like fighting. He hates violence, but he still fights anyway. And I can relate to that because I was forced into doing karate from a young age, and I hated it. I completely hated violence anyway back then. But as a 10-year-old, fighting, I abhorred it. And being pushed into doing a martial art like karate, it upset me. I hated the thought that I could use this martial art to hurt people, even if it was just to defend myself. I didn't want to see people fight, even though back then I thought that karate was just for boys. Fullmetal Alchemist made me realise, through people like Winry, who, even though they don't know how to fight like Ed and Al do, they still fight in their own way. Alphonse and Winry, in that respect, helped me handle that time. There were some other contributing factors as well, but Fullmetal Alchemist helped a whole lot. I was so glad when I gave up karate. I was so happy, and I didn't feel like it was a cage, a prison, because it was. I hated it. And that's probably where I can also relate to Ed, because the things that Ed had to deal with as a child, after trying to resurrect his mother along with Alphonse, what happened to him must have felt like a prison, because everything changed so much. He must have felt like a prisoner and not being able to break free. But he and Alphonse did. They found the strength to. And that is one of the things which inspired me in this series. And Winry too. She was so strong, waiting for the brothers to come back and to tell her things as well. Because sometimes it's hard when people don't open up to you and you know there's something wrong. She's always been a good listener, as have I. So I wait until they're ready to tell me. And that is one of the things that Fullmetal Alchemist has taught me, to wait until for these people to open up. Even if you're desperate for them to do so because you see their suffering and you want to end it, sometimes you have to wait until they do it of their own accord. Anyway, my first reaction to Fullmetal Alchemist was that it was not just because it was different from other series that I'd encountered, but it just felt so real to me. Not just because of the many issues which were dealt with in the series, but the characters themselves. They were so multifaceted, and as I've explained previously, there are some things that the characters go through which I went through myself, so I can completely empathise with them. I am not physically handicapped like Ed. I'm mentally handicapped, you could say. I have a learning difficulty. Even though it's mild, it has a huge impact on my life. And yes, it has felt like a prison. And Edward being without one arm and without another leg and being confined to a wheelchair, that must have been so hard, especially for someone that's so young who would probably want to go and run around and play with his friends. And someone like me who also felt she couldn't do that at that age because all the kids just teased her and shut her out. I mean, unlike Ed at that point, I wasn't aware of why this was happening. I retained my innocence just for a little longer until I learnt of what I had, and then my life changed. It made me have a whole new perspective of why these people were doing what they were doing, and why I was looked upon the way I was by other people, even outside of school. And I reckon Edward's experience also opened his eyes to things like that as well. Opened his eyes to what truly happens when you try and resurrect somebody from the dead, when you try and hope for something like that. His hopes were so innocent. I want to see my mother smile again. And it's the same with Alphonse. And my point of view back then was also equally naive. There's no one like me in the world. I'm a special person. I am who I am. There's no one like me in the world. And I'm proud of that. That's what I used to think when I was his age. But it all changed after that. Short time later, just like it did with Edward's life, my whole perspective was changed and my world turned upside down. Fullmetal Alchemist has helped me with things like this. And that it's only a label. This learning difficulty is just something that people use. It's the name of it is just something that people use to label the condition. And it's thanks to that I found out a lot of things about it. Just like Edward and Alphonse in their journey to try and recover their body parts and their bodies. Because they researched, they learned so many things, even if those revelations surprised them or shocked them. They took it in their stride, and I did the same, because they inspired me to. And that's how I fell in love with Fullmetal Alchemist. Sure, the alchemy and adventure is cool, but what Fullmetal Alchemist is really about is sacrifice, brotherhood, humanity, overcoming pain, and family. It's about family because even though Edward and Alphonse lost their mother and their father is gone, they have the Rock Bells, who act as just much as a family as they did when they had their mother. They're so close that they may as well be family, and I can also relate to that because I have a childhood friend who is also the daughter of the best friend that my mum has, and we just grew up together and we were more or less like sisters. Just like the relationship between Winry and Ed and Alphonse when they were growing up, and even when they begin their journey to try and recover things that they'd lost. They always went back to the Rockbell residence, always, even after they'd burnt their own house down. And it's about sacrifice as well. The brothers sacrificed a lot, but they had to sacrifice still more in order to get the answers they sought. It's also about brotherhood. The bond between Edward and Alphonse is strong, extremely strong. They live for each other. They love one another, and that is why they want to get their body parts back. Edward wants to get Al's body back. Alphonse wants to get Ed's arm and leg back. They're doing it for each other, not for themselves. And that kind of selflessness is just beautiful. It really is. They do say that blood is thicker than water, and in the case of Ed and Alphonse, it really is. That's the most profound and unbreakable bond that you will witness in the series. It's also about overcoming pain, because they experienced so much grief and anguish and loss in their childhood because of what happened. And they experience still more in their journey, but they still push forward. No matter what, they keep on pressing on until they find the answers they seek, until they arrive at their destination. It's also about humanity because, as I said before, Fullmetal Alchemist deals with a lot of human issues, from racism to things like death as well. Both are very human issues that we encounter every day. Fullmetal Alchemist is the kind of story that makes you laugh, but also makes you cry. But most of all, it makes you think about life because of the multitude of things which happen throughout the series, which you can relate to in real life. They may be in a fantastical environment. It may be, even though it's a sci-fi anime, some of the issues there are very, very real. And those who have suffered as a result of these issues, have confronted these issues, or have just witnessed them, having this covered in an anime really hits it home. Especially even if you've never experienced such issues yourself, but you know of them, it really hits home. And it's also the kind of story that touches you as well, and it stays with you. As I said, even years later I'll still watch it. I'll never get tired of it. It's the kind of story that's just will never die. It'll always live, because the things which are dealt with in the story and the things that happen, they won't ever change. They happen in everyday life. Fullmetal Alchemist taught me many lessons which stuck with me. Especially things like pain doesn't define you. It's what you do with it that counts. And it's also things like handicaps, the colour of your skin, where you're from, what age you are. They don't define you. It's how you perceive them and what you do with them that truly matters. And also that true love can't be bound by the laws of equivalent exchange. Although equivalent exchange itself is also a very interesting and very useful principle to learn from. You have to give if you want to gain. It also taught me things about life as well, in general. Things like that even when people die, they'll always be with you. As in, you'll always have their memory within you. And that is why Alphonse and Edward were able to move on, because they cherished their mother's memory, and that was enough for them. This is what Fullmetal Alchemist means to me, how it touched my heart. This is how it touched the heart of millions of fans, just like me, all across the world. I've also gotten into Brotherhood too over the years. I watched that probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, when it was coming out in Japan, and that's when I realised how much of a different story it was, and in fact I like it much better than the previous series, and now, reading the manga, I can see why. But that is merely my interpretation. I love both series, but like them both subtitled and dubbed, one of the rare anime series in which they're both very good. Either version is easily watchable and unforgettable and very enjoyable. Even though that friend that introduced me to Fullmetal Alchemist is gone now, it's because of her that I got into it. I remember having a crush on the Fullmetal Alchemist and having a really cute plushie of him too. I mean, I've got to admit, I thought when I first saw Edward Elric, when she introduced me to him, gosh, I thought he was so kick-butt and cool. I really liked him. I still do. even though my favourite character is Winry,